business and Holstein world. I'm just going to do a couple of brief introductions and then we'll turn it over to your expert group here for our topic about polled genetics. As I said, I'm with Dairy Business Communications. We've got several of my colleagues here. Cliff Passano, who's publisher at Dairy Business, Deb Morneau, Jessica Torres, and Katie Hitt. We're happy to be here and happy to be partnering up with Pro Dairy and with New York Holstein Association. For the past number of years, we have been delighted to work with the New York Holstein Association in a program that is of interest not only to dairy producers, but also to folks who enjoy, appreciate, breed, and market registered cattle as well. We've had some great program ideas, and I want to credit Ed Tyler. Ed's here somewhere. I just saw him a few moments ago. Ed's right here. He and his wife do a great job each year coming up with a concept and a topic and some panelists who will be of interest and who will talk about some things that are of real interest to both breeders and commercial dairy producers. We appreciate Ed and his persistence. Also with the New York Holstein Association, we have Patsy Gifford down front here, the Executive Secretary, and Mike McCaffrey, Editor of the New York Holstein News. And we're delighted to work with the association. Our program this afternoon has three speakers and a moderator. Our moderator, whom I'm going to introduce, she's right here behind me, is Dr. Kimberly Morrow. She's from the North Country. She's with Extension, but she has a dairy background. Her family's in New Hampshire. And she is not only well educated but well experienced, and her experience includes being president of the Red and White Dairy Cattle Association. So we're delighted that Kim and her fellow panelists are willing to be here and talk with you today. As we did this morning, there'll be some brief presentations, and you'll hear a little bit from each speaker, I expect. There'll be some questions, and then we're going to be opening it up to questions from the audience, and that's often some of the most interesting parts of the program. So make a note of your questions, and you'll certainly have a chance to ask these speakers about it. We talked earlier about this registration card being your lunch ticket, and some of you have filled that out, had lunch, and turned it in. We'd welcome knowing you're here, even if you didn't use this for lunch. We've got more cards available. It would be very helpful to us if you could tell us that you're here, who you are, and what your connection with the dairy industry is, whether you're a producer or an industry person. It helps us understand who's here and who these programs should be geared toward. And on the back is a place to indicate some, yes, I liked it, no, I didn't like it, here are some topics that I would be interested in another year. So these are very important to us, and we really appreciate each farm or each family turning in a card, if you would, please. We'll make sure that they're available on the ends of the tables with some pens, so you can just take a moment to tell us that you're here, which we appreciate. With no further ado, I will turn it over to Kimberly, and she'll get us started. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much. All right, thank you for that introduction. Today we're going to talk about polled genetics, which is a very exciting topic. It's something that if you pick up a copy of the Red Bloodlines, you pick up a Hordes Dairyman, a Dairy Management, you're probably going to see a polled genetics article. You're also or a Holstein World. Sorry about that. I'm going to now get thrown off the stage. All right, if you pick up any dairy magazine, let me cover my butt there. Any dairy magazine, you're probably going to find something on polled genetics, something on how are you going to manage horns, whether it's the genetic side or even the management aspect. It's a taboo subject, but we also have to look at it from an animal welfare aspect now, because we have all those fun people in our backyards, but we have to deal with it. So it's, you know, we can kill two birds with one stone. When we think about polled genetics, it's my favorite breed of cows. We get to look at the red and white dairy breed. So there's a lot of red and whites with polled genetics involved with it. So today we do have three panelists that are going to tell us a little bit about their background, how they got involved with polled genetics, and we often think about it's a hot topic. It's a hot topic because it's something new. You know, polled genetics is not new. It's just something that suddenly got into the limelight. So I'm going to introduce our three panelists. They're going to give a little bit of background about themselves. We've got some questions for them, and we'll open it up for you. So our first panelist, we're going to start with Brian Wanbury. If you want to give us a little background about yourself. He's from Dairy Bulls Online, a marketing and distribution service for breeders in Walkertown, Ontario. So if you want to give us some introduction as to what you're up to, how you got involved with Polled Genetics.
Thanks, Kimberly. Yeah, it started with me about a bit about my background. I'm from Canada. Grew up working on dairy farms and went and took my degree in animal science at University of Guelph. And after graduating, I started working my way up in the AI business. I started as a sales rep for Select Sires, then a technician for a CMAX partner in Canada, and then up to a sales rep, and then later on a regional manager where I looked after managing sales staff and technicians. Then about 3 years ago, things changed in my mind. I saw this new technology coming with genomics. I really saw that as a big change in our industry. With change comes opportunity. So I was looking at trying to figure out what my next 10 years would be like in the AI business. And with this genomics, I said, this is going to change the value of bulls, and breeders are going to see some value in their bulls. So I wanted to find a direct marketing business that would help capitalize or work with breeders on those values of their high genomic bulls. It led me to an introduction to Roy McGregor of Aaron Dean Holsteins and Venture Genetics. He was a breeder of polled cattle. Him and I got talking when he was going to help me at a farm show just with another business I was in. And we just clicked and we said, wow, we can really help breeders of polled, bring polled more into the limelight. And genomics was, I think, the key in together for that. So to say much more, that's sort of where my general background is. But since then, I'll do one little bit more. So at that time, then we said too, people didn't really know this poll was out there, and everybody always said, well, poll wasn't good enough, things like those traits. We started a ranking and really used social media to bring awareness to polled genetics. So we started getting people to send us their polled animals with genomic testing and ranking polled animals with genomic testing. And it's grown and grown. Social media, we have now 13,000 followers on Facebook that are following polled calves. And it is fun. To this day, you put a picture of a polled calf on there and people are liking it. They're excited about it. It's something, everybody feels better in the dairy industry to see a calf that doesn't have to go through the hormone process. So in doing that, we now, we did genomic testing to an AI stud in the US, and we've acquired now 9 heterozygous polled bulls and 9 homozygous polled bulls. I'll get into that later, explaining how it works. But now it's exciting. People are interested, they're flushing, people are talking about polled, so we're happy to work with those breeders that can help develop this.
So our second panelist today from New York State is Nate Faust from Roland N. He's dairy herd manager from Rockstream, New York, and he has some red and white polled Holsteins. So Nate, if you want to give us some of your background, kind of how you got into the poll, a little bit about your herd and what you're up to with Polled Genetics.
Okay, yeah, I feel a little bit, I guess, unworthy to be here with, there's a lot of people that did the hard work for years before. Some of the credit for the poll in our herd I would give to John Burkett here, and I guess his dad. They were into the poll probably 40 or 50 years before it was full, and they pushed it hard. We owe a lot of credit there. Also, I'd like to give a lot of credit to my parents. It's been a blessing to have the opportunity to work with a herd of red and white Holsteins there on our farm. My parents' names were Alan and Carol Faust. They've developed a herd. My mom was into the breeding, and maybe 15 years ago, we had some red and we really decided to really switch to all red bulls. Now our herd is, right now we're milking 90 cows, and we have 2 black cows that are red carriers, and the rest are all red, so very much red. And also the fold, I think we kind of accidentally got into it. I think we bought a whole cow unknowingly when my parents started out in the mid-late 80s. They moved to the farm there in 85. And then some of the early bulls we used were some of the Burkett Falls bulls, low noms and no noms. We had a lot of really nice cows from that. So that was, 15 years ago. We had some of our pulled ones there, 10, 15 years. The last 5 years, we decided to really push the pulled. We've been using 80 to 90% pulled bulls. Now our herd is, the milking herd is about a third pulled, and the young stock are about 2/3 pulled. And some of those are homozygous, so that we expect that to go a whole lot faster in the next 3 to 5 years. We expect to have the majority of our milking herd to be pulled within 5 years or so. So that's a little bit about our background.
Thank you, Nate. Our third panelist is John Burkett from Burkett Falls Farm in East Freedom, Pennsylvania, and they have 100 registered Holsteins. About 80% of them are polled. He's currently a member of the Holstein Genetics Advancement Committee, and I guess Nate put it pretty nicely. He was using polled before polled was cool. So, John, do you want to give us a little bit of your background?
Thank you, Kim. It's an honor to sit here with everyone in Holstein World. Holstein World we owe a lot to, because in the early days of promoting our polled, Holstein World was right there. And the motto that we've used over the years, and Joe might not even be aware of this, but polled Holsteins, the solution to your horny problems. Part of that motto, the late Whitey McGowan was responsible for it. My father and Whitey spent a lot of time on the phone years ago, and I can remember my father suggesting this motto to Whitey. Should I use it or not? And of course Whitey was supportive of it, and we went on with it. But my dad always said it. He said, it's really nice to be somewhere and a good-looking young lady will come up to you and say, hey, are you the guy that can solve my horny problems? So, our poll started in 1960 by sheer accident. At that time, my father was working with his father's Guernsey herd. He wanted to register Holstein, so I think he had one at the time, and he said she was just a so-so cow. So he went to Wisconsin and bought a load of registered Holsteins in 1960. And when he got these cows home, the one gave birth to a heifer calf that never grew horns. And her name was Princess Fane Halchi. And my father, this was 4 years before I came on the scene, so I didn't know anything about it. My father at the time wasn't aware that she was polled, but he remembered that he never dehorned her. This cow by the name of Princess in the late 60s and early 70s went on and made 7 consecutive records over 1,100 pounds of fat. And it was that trait that got my father interested in this cow. The fact that she was polled was added value. She had a daughter, a Rosa-faced Acacia, our daughter, that had 5 consecutive records over 1,100 pounds of fat, and she was also polled. So it was that cow that started it. A few years later, it was my 4-H cow. We had a polled granddaughter of the old Princess cow that we bred to elevation. And this polled elevation heifer calf was born in 1974. That was a Sophia cow that ended up being 93, 240,000 pound lifetime, and she was my second 4-H cow, and there's 2 cows buried in our yard. Sophia is one, and Princess is the other. But as to say it wasn't fashionable, or it certainly wasn't cool to promote pole genetics in the early days. It really wasn't, I guess, but my father always said, hey, there's going to be a time when we need to breed these cattle that don't have horns. And he said, we're going to keep breeding them, don't matter what anyone says, laughs at you or whatever. He said, someday the Holstein breed will be pole. And he said that 30, 40 years ago. And people laughed and people questioned, well, where did you put the, when the reds started showing up pole, people started asking, well, when did you put the pole Hereford into the pedigree? But that's been that's where the poles have come from. Fortunately, the red showed up by accident, just as the pole showed up, and we've been able to make a little money and have a whole lot of fun. And Dad's now 81, and he says the phone rings a couple times a day. People inquiring about pole, and Dad said, well, he said, you know, it only took 50 years for people to catch on to there's value to poles. So it's been fun. We get a little bit of the credit, but there's a whole lot of other people doing a lot for pole as well. So we're happy to be part of this story.
Thank you, John. So I have a couple of questions. So kind of like Brian made the comment, they do a lot of stuff on social media. I posted that we were going to be doing this panel on Facebook the other day and put up there, so send me all your questions. And I got bombarded by a lot of questions. I'm sure you guys have questions, but apparently when you put stuff on social media, you get all sorts of entertaining stuff. A lot of it was beef related, so I'm going to avoid that stuff for you guys, but apparently it does come out quite a bit. People want to know where the Hereford is in the red and white dairy breed. There's no Hereford in the red and white dairy breed. Let's clear that up right now. But one of the things that often comes up is if we're going to be using polled genetics, we want to start looking at polled. Does that mean we're going to have to use lower quality bulls? You guys can go down through, or if one of you wants to answer it.
So, yeah, just even since we started with it's actually, there's a really good article in Holstein World that they put out by Dr. Ben Dorhorst, stealing a bit of same background we can share. But it's compared it, and I feel polled within 1 to 2 generations of regular bulls. And also the biggest thing with bulls seems to change too is before nobody really valued young bulls in their mating programs. Young bulls were viewed as inferior, test sires, things like that. But now this increased knowledge we have with genomics, everybody's rushing to get the earliest semen on the youngest bulls. Those are the bulls with the better genetic value because they're further ahead with the reduced generation interval. So if you're using currently proven bulls, some genomic, high genomic polled bulls are actually ahead of what you're using in proven bulls. So there's really, I feel, very little sacrifice in using a polled bull. If you give your own, if everybody gives your own,
Yeah, I would agree a lot with what Brian's saying here. If you look at a bull like Longboy, for a proven bull, if he wouldn't be red and he wouldn't be polled, he'd still be a good bull, and he would have, assuming he'd be used the way he was, he would still have a good proof. And that's a solid daughter proof on him. And I think the limiting factor to polled was just lack of being used in the mainstream high-end genetics, and that was what limited it. And there's only, in the years past, there's only a handful of breeders really pushing it. Like Burkett Falls or Hickory May from Pennsylvania. So I think the limiting factor was that, and now we've seen kind of an explosion of polled genetics in the last 2 or 3 years. I think a lot of that is genomics has helped with that. Social media, as Brian mentioned, and I believe Brian and his partner Roy have really been an effective tool in pushing the polled. And so, yeah, we don't feel like we've sacrificed by breeding polled. So yeah, we have a herd with a lot of polled genetics, and it's a good herd of cows. Maybe not the best, but it's yeah, a decent herd of cows that we like to work with. as far as the bulls to use, that has really changed in the last couple of years. So.
I would agree. I think today the poll genetics will compete right with other genetics in the population. I tell people that the only place that polled is behind the horn population is on paper. We've had polled cows score 93 and 94 point. We've had polled cows make 40,000 pounds of milk. We've had polled cows make 250,000 pounds of production. So I don't buy the fact that the polled genetics is inferior to the horn. Maybe at one time that was the case, but today it's certainly very comparative. And if I could sacrifice, even if I did have to sacrifice a little production to gain polled and not have that nasty job of dehorning, I would take it. I told these guys the last thing I did yesterday before I left home was dehorn a couple calves, just to remind myself what a dismal, miserable job it is. We don't dehorn many calves, and I didn't do it intentionally yesterday just before I came here, but I thought it needed done. We've been at the shows and busy summer, so there was 5 or 6 there, and I dehorned them. But believe me, every time I dehorn them, I think if this job could be eliminated forever and ever, it would be a step forward for the dairy industry, the Holstein breed, and humanity in general. There is no nice way to take horns off calves. And I hear over the years people say, there's nothing to it. You just put a little paste on, or you just put the burners on it, or get the Mexicans to do it. My reply is, if there's nothing to it, just let me put those burners on part of your body for a minute and a half and tell me there's nothing to it. But I have to give credit to the beef breeds. You know, the beef breeds was a whole lot more aggressive in taking the horns off than we were in the dairy business. In the 60s, the beef breeds got very aggressive, and you know, it wasn't because of animal welfare, it was because of just efficiency. And they got active, and today, if you have a beef animal with horns, they're not worth a whole lot of money. So kudos to the beef industry, but maybe I didn't stick right to the point, but I wanted to make that point that I still dehorn calves. I still despise the job, and I do it at home because I'm afraid for someone else to do it. I don't want someone else burning the calves because not that there's a good way to do it, but I feel more comfortable when I can do it, and I burn them as little as possible. But oh, I know what I was going to say. The point I was going to make. I'm sorry, Kim. I was at a show last week, and this cow was in the ring, and I looked at her head, and I thought, boy, I wish I had a camera. I'd like to take her a picture. A really good cow with her part at the top of her head burned away from a dehorner. And I just thought, you know, not that I'm promoting the animal race thing, I'm not. They have some good points. They're crazy about a lot of things, but just a picture to show what a bad dehorn job can do. And I'll never forget when I was a youngster, I'm still a youngster, Patsy, don't. But I wasn't very old, and I can remember being at a farm one time and saw this cow that her eye was gone. And the herd owner made the comment, well, he said, we got a little dehorning paste down the side and ate her eye out. But those are the things that when you're young leave an impression, and I was never a fan of paste after that. But, okay.
Thank you, John. I think it's important that we remember there's also the animal welfare aspect with the dehorning and polled genetics. One thing you kind of touched on with the polled genetics and the bulls, and that was leading into another question that one of my friends from Australia sent me. What do you think is out there for the international marketing demand for polled genetics right now? Yeah, John, start, move down this way.
Well, it's a good market, it's a strong market, and to be honest with you, the best market we've had over the years has been from the European market because of the pressure put on the Europeans from the animal welfare movement. That has been our #1 market, and since then the domestic market has improved greatly. But I think the world around, I don't necessarily think any one particular country, of course Europe started, but I think the world around, if they're breeding cattle they're interested in pole genetics. So there's no one spot anymore that I would say has more interest than others. It's desired the world around.
Yeah, getting, as far as marketing, I'll give a little bit more of our background in more recent years. About two and a half years ago, we got into some of the high-end, high genomic polled animals. Our family with some partners, and we bought a calf that was full sister to lad at select sires, and since then we've had some. There's been the market's really exploded. There's been a lot of really high-end males and females in the pool. So for the marketability, as far as selling embryos and stuff, the market, like John said, the market, European market is extremely strong. We have no problem selling pooled embryos to like Germany and Holland that way, but we haven't been into that for a lot of years.
Yeah. And just even ourselves with the bulls too, we have inquiries. We actually sold, again, we market a lot of bulls that are still even owned by the breeders too, but we've got semen that's went to Germany, to France, to Italy, to Germany. Germany's a big, big market. And also now we're getting inquiries from the UK and Australia. So almost every day there's more people around the world that are wanting bull genetics. And even just to show the interest too, you just have to look at sales results too, and you're seeing bull cattle top sales all over the world. They are in demand. And then in behind too is the European Union. There's, somebody worded it this way, there's a little closer relationship from people wanting, or even in the world, people are starting to care more what goes on with their food. There is even legislation in place in some of the European countries that are trying to make a plan to eventually eliminate dehorning. So that when those kind of plans are in place, that just makes more demand.
Thank you for those answers. I have a whole list of questions, but that's not going to be very entertaining if I just read off my list. So, are there any questions from you guys out in the audience on polled genetics, anything from these guys on how they're marketing their animals, how Brian's running his dairy bulls online, what Nate's doing at home, how John's managed to have polled genetics in Pennsylvania for 40 some odd years and kept that going?
Yeah, I got to talk to all these guys on the phone before. Now, Brian, on your dairy bull online now, do the bulls stay at the farmer's place, or do you have a housing for them, or how do you market their semen?
So the way we got started with it was there was limited access to genomic testing, so we worked with the AI study in Nebraska that actually had some access to genomic testing. So some of our bulls are housed there. We're now with more of the opening up with genomic testing. We're working with different independent collection facilities. We also work with Integral Genetics in Illinois, and they actually can export to Europe, so we house a lot of our bulls there. But we just do what's most economical for the bull, what's convenient for the farmer, and work with the standards that are in place for good semen quality through the NAB, so it's all high quality semen. But both those facilities can ship direct to farm. And the reason even with polled is, with polled being in demand, if you were to try to stock a whole technician force or sales rep with some bulls that don't have much semen, it's sometimes more convenient to get these bulls shipped out direct, and that's why we've picked that model. And again, it's more profitable back to the owner of the bull, and we have less costs.
Now, are either of you working with his dairy bulls online, or?
We just actually sent our first bull to dairy bulls online, so he's just ready to start producing semen. So the process has worked very smoothly so far, and I guess the next 4 or 5 months are going to give us a more solid review of dairy bulls online. They've been very good to work with. they've treated the breeder very good on the bulls they've had, so I feel very confident with that. And plus, there's someone you can call and talk to and get good practical help. So.
We have not worked with them on any bulls, and it's not because there's, I commend everything they've done. They've created more interest in pole than any other entity that I can think of since pole became popular. But we still bulls, and we collect bulls and market semen from the farm. It's a side business that's grown quite well for us, but I'm sure sooner or later we will work together on bulls.
Any other questions?
Yeah, Nate, or any of you, what are the highest genomic red and red carrier pole bulls that you're using now that are Longboy free?
First one that comes to my mind now is Pine Tree Bull, I believe. That's a bull at Dairy Bulls Online. Pine Tree has several. There would be Pine Tree O'Hare at ABS, Ohio Style at Dairy Bulls Online. We've used some Ohio Style. I'm trying to think of some other Longboy free ones. There's Proxy, he's a homozygous bull red one. We used him. Some of the early calves from him, they're about a year old now.
I have a question concerning genetic testing of pole bulls and heifers. Do you currently genomic test your females, or to compare phenotypic appearances and compare genomic testing? Or can you tell a little bit about your experiences with genomic testing for the poultry? I understand there's a little bit of controversy right now, a couple different places to test. And I'm just wondering what your experiences have been.
We'll probably all touch on it, but the biggest thing is, so everybody gets confused. You probably should have mentioned this at the start too. Pole is a dominant trait, so that's something everybody should be aware of. Other traits that are known in the breed we talk about, recessive, like red. It's you have to have it from both parents for it to show up with red. With pole, you just need one copy for it to show up phenotypically from one parent. But the thing with phenotype, so phenotype's what you see. If you remove the visual key, which is the horn, then you can't tell an animal's polled if it's been dehorned or burnt or marked. You can't tell if it's polled or not. So this was actually, when we started back to what the two big changes, there was genomics was a huge change, but the ability to test for homozygous was another big change. Before you had to have an animal that would have 10 calves born that were polled out of horn, from a horned female or from horn bulls on a polled female. That's how you would verify homozygous, but they can do it now through testing. So this gets a little confusing, but I think I want to get to your question. So they know these things like SNPs, which tell you, they're little segments that tell you where genes may be. The best way I worked it was the earlier testing for polled. It's like highway markers on the road. You knew from this highway marker to this highway marker, there's a gas station, okay? Well, you didn't know whether the gas station was open. So the first test was really good, telling us we had the polled in that area. But now they've then come up with a newer study from Germany that's more precise, and they can tell whether it's open or not, or whether that polled gene's working or not. So this whole little bit of confusion, it shouldn't be confusing. Your polled animals should not have horns, okay? What got confusing, and it's also this interest and excitement about polled, is when an animal had a chance of being polled and you took away the visual cue, that led it to doing the testing, and that testing wasn't as accurate as it should have been, and it's been improved now.
what kind of economic value do you place on polled in the general marketplace? What kind of an upcharge do you charge for that genetic trait? And do you see it holding up over time?
Certainly today, there is added value to polled. You know, these sales of recently, the National Convention sale of polled calf, co-topped the sale at $70,000. If that calf wasn't polled, it would have brought half or less probably. I tell a story about a neighbor that milks a lot of cows that had a standing order for bulls, breeding bulls. And he's a very sharp operator. But every year he got a bull. So I told him, I said, we had the horn bulls are at one price, the polled bulls are several hundred more, and he'd never pay more for a polled bull. So to make my point with him, when he got a bull, it's been 12 or 14 years ago now, I said, I'll tell you what I'll do. I said, I'll sell you a polled bull for the same price as a horn bull, just so you could get some polled genetics in your herd. Well, I didn't know it, but that bull was homozygous that he got, and I sold him for the same price. Long story short, he has a standing order now for 2 bulls a year, and only polled. He won't take a horn bull. I kid him once in a while, I said, you're about ready for a horn bull again. No way. I said, thank you, send me any horn bulls. But for those that's out there really breeding for the top end and playing the genomics end, of course, polled is going to have a considerable added value. But I think the real explosive market is going to be the commercial dairyman that is realizing now that, hey, I can take the horns off. I don't need to pay anyone to dehorn them. I don't need to give them anesthesia. I don't have to have that setback. I can do all that. I can breed the horns off of them, and I'm not going to lose a thing. I'm going to gain. I think that's the most explosive market for polled today, and because of that, I think there's going to be a continued added value for polled for years to come. And to be honest with you, I think down the road, and not the too distant future, if a bull has horns, I don't think the AI companies will be taking him in.
dairy market down the road, why is it being limited? Not limited, it's, you're focusing so much on bread, which is completely a niche market because the commercial area does not care one way or the other whether it's cows, black or red. Why is the focus on not to try to rain on the red and white parade? But why isn't it being used more on blacks where there's clearly a much larger genetic pool with a lot higher genomic pools in the black and white breed, where you could probably advance a lot faster with poll?
Kim, can you repeat that question for us, please? I didn't get there with the mic.
So I think he just wants this on videotape. Is that what it really is? No, so what he's asking is if it really is a polled is going to become a management trait, why has it really been a focus of the red and white breed, and why hasn't this become a black and white trait? Why haven't they used it in the black and white herds? Is that kind of a good synopsis of your question?
Especially since there's a much larger genetic.
Right, since there's a much larger genetic pool in the black and white herds, and they really are the commercial herds these days.
Just two quick responses. In our own situation at home, part of the reason was because we had such a large percentage of our herd that was red or red carrier. We didn't necessarily try to advance the reds over black on polled. I mean, it makes no difference to us, color, as long as they're polled. The other thing is, I think that because there's more red, more polled in the red population is partly due to the Red and White Association being strong proponents of polled for 25 years. And they promoted polled along with red. And I think that's why you see a higher percentage of polleds in reds. But I agree, I mean, the black market is wide open. as far as breeding polled, and I don't see any preference.
I'm gonna add something. My mic wants to work. It's not in the Holstein breed, but I do know there are some polled Jersey bulls and some polled brown Swiss bulls. It's not black and whites, but they are starting to get some more polled genetics into some of the other colored breeds. And I guess Jersey does have a big push because they're trying to increase some of their polled bulls into some of the commercial herds. They actually have a big push for polled bulls in the Jersey breed down in Australia, which is kind of interesting. But that's because of the animal welfare aspect.
Yeah, to answer your question a little bit more there, I think part of the reason that polled is going with red is some of the bulls simply went together. And part of it, I think, was the people that were breeding for red were willing to explore unique genetics. And I think that's kind of some of the basis for that. For example, in our herd, we wanted something different. We were just looking for something different. That's why red was prominent for us. So we've grown to like red, and that's simply a niche market. That's something fun for us. There's no economic value to red, but the polled has that. And I think polled has very quickly in the last 2 years been getting mixed into the high-end population. You see a lot of polled animals out of the high-end horned black and white bulls, and there's a lot of lines developing now. So I think that's going to continue to grow extremely fast in the next few years.
I'll just add the same. I give a lot of credit to the Red and White Association too for helping encouraging it. And again, it's almost you take the red as a negative, but it's also not a negative too. If you look at what we're doing in the mainstream industry, we're almost lacking some diversity in bloodlines. So I almost view some of these red and polled genetics as alternative bloodlines too that we're so bad we're needing also. But at the same point, we do have some of the highest polled bulls right now. There's a 704 net merit bull. He's black and white, no red in his genetics at all. He's an Ohio style, O style out of a significant, so it's no red genetics at all. So they are there. And even for the long-term sustainability of polled, we're going to want to try to keep some of these lines separate. There is some diversity that we need to encourage people to keep separate to make for the long-term sustainability of polled too. But it is in the black and whites, and it's getting there quicker every day.
One other thought, just because that is a good question. I think maybe part of it was, 75% of the dairy cows in the world are red hair. And because the European market was strongly conducive to polled, and they also wanted red, I think that might be part of it too, that they wanted red and polled. Because so many of us was trying to breed for that market, that may be another reason why the incidence is higher in the reds.
You have mentioned two different terms with the poll. Could you explain those, number one? And number two, what is the quickest way to get polled into your herd generation after generation?
Probably the easiest way I explain it, there's two big confusing words, heterozygous, homozygous. People mix them all up and can't say them. So the easiest way to think about it, and actually it's really neat, a few people will know it, Joel Connect is a long-time breeder of polled too. He has a way of just saying things simple. He says, it's almost, just think of it as the homozygous is 100% polled. And that means every one of your calves from a female or a male will all be polled from a homozygous animal. And the other one's heterozygous, which means 50%. It gets confusing when we start mixing the two together, but the take-home message is heterozygous 50%, homozygous 100%. That's as simple as I think.
I tell people, if you have a homozygous polled bull and you breed them to 100 Texas Longhorns, you'll get 100 polled Texas Longhorns. That makes them question what you're telling them, but that's
John, are you going to
that's the
start
analogy
breeding
I use.
Texas Longhorns?
We actually do have a few Texas Longhorns. I've had a polled one or two too over the years.
I missed, Mr. Merrill, I missed your question about the Longboy. I didn't hear the total response about Longboy free. That's a tough question, and Longboy seems to be a bad word in the bull breed that we're trying to avoid. You know, give me a Longboy free bull. Well, if you bring that to the black and white market, get me a Shottle free, get me an Oman free, get me a Goldwyn free. They're almost impossible to find, and now we're running into planets everywhere. So my suggestion in answering your question, Alan, would be go to Holstein and use the inbreeding calculation. It's very simple. Nate has a bull, long, available from Tag, that is almost 2,200 GTPI, and Longboy is the fourth. It's, let's see, how is it, Nate? Cameron out of Death Street, out of a Longboy. So when you water it down like that, it doesn't take many generations to be lower inbreeding than your planets and your omens that we're dealing with in the black and white breed. So don't get too carried away with the Longboy free thing, although that's important. And like Brian said, we're trying to protect some of those lines, so we're not having all the inbreeding that we're seeing in the black and white. But let's not make that our primary focus. Look more at the inbreeding calculation and where all that plays out. Does that make sense?
Are there any other questions from the group?
Would you explain what scurs are and how often they occur and what the incidents that you've dealt with has been?
Scurs is polled. It's a polled trait. It's generally sex-linked. Now, our line of polled, most of the males, unless they're heterozygous, will develop some sort of scur when they reach puberty. Now, the scur will vary anywhere from the size of the top of that water bottle to a 3 or 4 inch actual horn that looks like a horn. But it never affixes to the skull. You can shake it, it's loose. And I'll never forget, years ago we sent a bull to ABS as polled. And after they had him a year or so, they called up and said, hey, this polled bull you sent out here has got horns. But long story short, he just developed larger scurs than normal. And he was polled and he transmitted polled. But they're still working on it. I mean, we're doing some research right now with a lab that's trying to better define what scurs are. But for the most part, females are scur-free. The males, for the most part, and a lot of the males will get some sort of scurs.
One other point to that too, homozygous animals won't show scurs. So if you've got polled from both sides, they won't show scurs.
One note on that as well. Some of you get the cattle connection that just came out. Take a look at Tag's ad that they had. There was a full page ad on the right side, I forget which page it was, but it was a picture of Long P, which is Nate's bull, beside Shan Osborne, and look at the crowns on their heads. Long had no scurs, and I think, do any of Liz's daughters have scurs, or sons have scurs? Yeah, a few of them that they would have got from the male side. But on Long's head, the crown of his head is perfect. And in Shanazberg, you can distinctly see a scur or two. So I think you guys answered it well.
Are there any other questions from the group? Okay. Brian, you kind of talked a little bit about how you do your marketing, pretty much all social media. John and Nate, do you want to share a little bit? And then Brian will come back to you, how you guys market most of your animals and the interest and how it's changed over the year. John, you have a little bit more history on the marketing of your animals.
probably in our case, the social media is probably the majority of it anymore, the internet. But there's just a lot of word of mouth. I mean, we still get calls pretty often, just, hey, you guys free to poll, what do you have that's homozygous polled and Longboy free? We've tried it all and it's all been successful to a certain degree, but I guess, you know, we still try to advertise and let people know what we have. They don't know unless you advertise and tell them what you have. So our advertising dollars has been money well spent for 50 years.
Yeah, with marketing there, Facebook would be a big word in marketing. Makes a lot of connections. It's more of a friendly connection versus an ad put in someone's face, and they can make connections too. I think that's been a big thing. We sold some of our pool genetics, actually full sisters to Long at a tag through Twitter, I believe. It was just a picture we posted on there. We found a private connection through that. And we were able to make a very good sale with no sales commission and no advertising. And also, I want to just go back to what Cam said here. By the way, he is a part owner of some of our better genetics there. So yeah, he's doing a good job of advertising the pool there for us. So he's a part owner of that one, Long at Tag. He's one of the highest pool red carrier pools.
Just touch on that too, but yeah, when you say Pold, you say Burkitts is the first name that jumps in your mind for Pold too, so again, credit to John and his dad for years of breeding Pold too. But the other thing is just even awareness too. I think lots of, like I'm an AI company, but there is lots of your existing AI suppliers do have Pold bulls. Just even what we've done, just trying to do is make awareness that's out there. Just even start asking for Pold. If you want to learn about it, you know, talk to your sales reps, your technicians, because Pold genetics are out there and it's increasing. But people didn't knew it existed until just recent. So just ask about it. I'm sure you can get some Pold genetics.
All right, thank you guys very much. One thing, like Brian mentioned earlier, if you do go on Facebook, they do have a polled calf on there. Someone submits, I think, at least once a day, if not more. There's always a picture of a newborn calf, and if it's not put up by them, someone's always posting a calf. And they do have some black and white ones on there too, so they are coming up. But the polled genetics, it's pretty interesting. I guess we'll have some closing remarks. What do you guys think is the future of polled genetics? I know that's an open-ended question, but what are your thoughts? Where do you see it heading?
First of all, I asked my father to come along today because I'll be the first to tell you he gets all the credit on our farm for developing polled. He was there and he saw value in it long before anyone else did it at home. And he, if you knew my father, he don't get real excited. I mean, he has a goal and he just steadily follows it. And he had hundreds, if not thousands, of opportunities to say, hey, this isn't going to work. But he stayed steadfast, and all the credit to him. I just tried to carry it on. He is 81. He still goes with me once in a while, but he thought it'd be a little long trip. Future of polled is the Holstein breed. The dairy breeds will be polled. There's no doubt about it. It's just a matter of time. And just something to ponder and to think about. I mean, we've never focused on polled really from the animal welfare point of things. I mean, the animal rights movement was always there, but that wasn't really the reason that we bred polled. We just thought that the industry, the breed, would be better off if we didn't have to go through that grisly activity. But a year ago, I got a call from David Beyer, who is the executive director of PETA. And he called 3 or 4 times before is there any PETA members in here? It don't matter, I'll say it anyway. It was 3 or 4 times he called before I returned his call because I wasn't quite sure how to handle it. I thought maybe he was trying to set me up or set us up. I talked to our veterinarian, who is very well aware of animal rights movement, animal welfare movements. And he continues to tell me, he said, when we go to vet conferences anymore, he said, we spend more time discussing animal welfare issues than we do veterinary medicine. And we milk in tie stalls. And he continues to say, quit calling them tie stalls. He said, call them comfort stalls. He said, you guys are under the gun. But anyway, back to the PETA call. David Byer, we started a dialogue with him, and after I talked to him, I have to actually appreciate his stance. And I guess the take-home message that I would like to let with you, if you're thinking along those lines, they're quick to tell you our membership is 3 or 4 million. We've got a lot of money. We've got a lot of say in the marketplace. He said, we commend you for what you've done in breeding, taking the horns off cattle. But he said, we continue to get pressure from our people that they want to buy milk and dairy products from cattle that's never been dehorned. And I think, wow. But, you know, they felt that in Europe. They had the same movement in Europe where they actually had legislation on the books that wanted to force the breeders to breed a certain percentage of their herd polled because of what was coming. But he didn't say, hey, it's going to happen, but I think he led into it in a way that, you know, I commend you guys for being, and actually as a breed, he said, I commend you guys for being progressive, but he said the egg industry's changed, the swine industry has changed, and he said down the road, he said the dairy industry may change too. So just keep that in mind, and I think, you know, if you don't want to breed your whole herd polled, breed 10% of them polled,